So, how does a country's most valuable asset, its land, end up in the hands of just a tiny, powerful few? Well, we're about to dive into the story of modern Egypt's great landowners. This was an aristocracy that, believe me, didn't just own the land, they completely reshaped the entire nation.
And to kick things off, just listen to this. It's a real gut punch from the chronicler Al-Jabardi. He's talking about the power that tax farmers, the multazims, held over the peasants, the fellahin. And he says their situation was, well, it was worse than being a slave. Think about that. This quote really sets a stark stage for the new class of elites who would come in and basically perfect this system of control.
Right, so this powerful new elite, they had a name, the Kibar al-Malak. And their rise to power was absolutely not an accident. The big question is, how did this tiny group manage to grab so much land, so much wealth, and ultimately so much control? Let's get into it.
Okay, so it's really important to get this straight from the start. The Kibar al-Malak, they weren't just, rich farmers, no way. They were a brand new aristocracy, a ruling class whose incredible power came directly from the soil, from the land itself. And this power? They would hold on to it for more than 100 years. Like I said, this did not happen by accident. The rise of this class was basically engineered through a legal revolution. I mean, the entire idea of who could even own land in Egypt was about to be turned completely on its head.
So, let's look at the before and after, because it's a huge shift. Before the 19th century, it was pretty simple. The land belonged to the state. Peasants, they worked it, sure, but they didn't own it. But then, these reforms come along, and boom! Suddenly, land is a commodity, something you can buy, you can sell, you can pass down to your kids. It became a legally protected asset. And you know what that's perfect for? Piling up massive amounts of wealth.
Now, this change didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, very deliberate series of legal moves. It kicked off in 1858 with a regulation that gave a huge advantage to wealthy investors. Then you get to the 1890s, and there's a whole flurry of new decrees and court rulings. You see, each new law was like a little chip, just chipping away at the old system, until finally, the legal groundwork for these enormous private estates was set in stone.
Okay, so the new laws are in place. The game has totally changed. The big question is, who was in the right place at the right time to take advantage of all this? Who actually became the new masters of the land?
Well, the new elite really came from 4 key groups. First up, and this is no surprise, you have Muhammad Ali's own royal family. Then, you've got the senior government officials and top army officers. Down at the local level, village chiefs and other big shots in the countryside use their clout to grab land. And finally, you had a bunch of foreigners and European investors who saw a golden opportunity and jumped right in.
And to give you a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about, get this. Just one branch of the royal family, just one, controlled over 105,000 feddans of land. Now, a feddan is a bit bigger than an acre, so we're talking about an absolutely massive territory. These guys weren't just playing the game, they were pretty much the ones who benefited the most from it. And this incredible wealth, it wasn't just numbers on a page. You could see it. It physically changed the landscape of Egypt. This new elite started funding these huge, grand architectural projects, like new mosques built in this revived Mamluk style. It was a way for them to show off their power and influence, not just out in the countryside, but right in the heart of the cities.
So, okay, you've got the legal framework in place, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. You need an economic engine to really make the fortunes explode. And for Egypt's land barons, that engine had a name: cotton.
And believe it or not, a war happening halfway around the world, the American Civil War, would have this massive, massive impact right there in the Nile Delta. See, with America's cotton suddenly unavailable to European factories, all these manufacturers started to panic. They desperately needed a new source, so they turned to Egypt, and the price for its amazing long staple cotton just skyrocketed.
I mean, the growth was just staggering. Look at these numbers. In 1821, Egypt was exporting less than 1,000 quintars, that's just a unit of weight, of cotton. Fast forward to 1910, and that number has exploded to over 5 million. This wasn't just regular economic growth. This was a tidal wave of cash, and it was flowing straight into the pockets of these new landowners.
So you've got these insane fortunes being made. It's a boom time. But you have to ask yourself, who really paid the price for this so-called economic miracle?
Well, the answer, sadly, is that the cost fell squarely on the peasants. This quote here really lays out the brutal system.
You had merchants and moneylenders who would exploit the fact that many small farmers couldn't read or write. They'd cheat them, trap them in a cycle of debt, and then, when they inevitably couldn't pay it all back, the result was simple and tragic. They lost their land.
Of course, this immense economic power didn't just stay in the fields. The Kibar al-Malak were smart. They very quickly turned all that money into direct political control, and they started shaping the nation's laws to benefit themselves.
And just look at how much control they had. It's wild. By 1929, the great landowners made up almost 3/4 of the board of one of the main political parties. Let that sink in. They weren't just lobbying politicians or influencing them from the sidelines. They were the political establishment.
And boy, did they have a playbook. It was simple, really. Step 1, control the political parties. Fill them up with landowners and their buddies. Step 2, shape the laws. Get bills passed for cheap loans, low taxes, new roads, anything that benefited their huge estates. Step 3, block anyone who gets in your way. Any talk of land reform or helping out the peasants, vetoed. It was the perfect self-perpetuating cycle. Wealth bought power, and power protected and grew the wealth.
And a perfect example of this in action was something called the Five Fidans Law. Now, I know, it sounds super technical, but its effect was absolutely devastating for small farmers. What it did was make even the tiniest plots of land, we're talking the last safety net a peasant family had, seizable for debt. It basically gave a legal green light to the very moneylenders who were trapping them.
So, after a century of this massive concentration of wealth and power, what was the end result? What kind of legacy did the land barons leave behind? Well, it was profound, and you could argue its shadow is still felt today. Essentially, it created a society of extremes, a nation of two halves living in two different worlds. On one side, you have this tiny, fabulously wealthy, European-focused elite, and on the other, you had the vast majority of Egyptians, a peasantry trapped in a never-ending cycle of debt and poverty.
And the long-term impacts were just massive. It cemented this really rigid social hierarchy for decades. It held back the economy, making it too dependent on just one thing. And, of course, it fueled all this deep-seated resentment. It was like a powder keg, and all of that inequality eventually just exploded. It laid the groundwork for the 1952 revolution, which came in and overthrew the whole system, the monarchy and the land barons right along with it.
And that really leaves us with a big question to think about, doesn't it? The story of the Kibar al-Malak is over, but it makes you wonder, how does the legacy of concentrated wealth, something like this, continue to shape a society's path, long after the fortunes themselves are gone?